many times have you heard someone tell you your photography equipment doesn't matter? I got news for you. It's a lie. But there are a lot of photographers out there telling you this. If I asked you to build me a house, but told you, you can't use power tools. You can only build it using hand tools. Would you be able to do this? Well, of course you could. But there's no denying that the use of power tools is going to make the entire process much easier and much faster, and you're probably going to be able to do it with more accuracy. When it comes to wildlife photography, of course you can use cheaper equipment. But trying to photograph wildlife with cheaper equipment is definitely going to make the whole process a little harder. And it's probably going to require that you have a little bit more in the way of luck. But today, I don't want to talk about our everyday wildlife equipment. This isn't about cameras and lenses and all of that stuff. I want to talk about 3 pieces of equipment today that you've probably heard of, maybe even considered buying, but probably don't use. Hey, by the way, I'm Jeff from Magnolia Photography SC, professional wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. If you're returning to the channel, I want to welcome you back. And if you're new to the channel, I want to welcome you in. So glad you are joining us today as we talk about 3 pieces of equipment that I think are pretty essential for every wildlife photographer and something you should be considering if you haven't considered it before, or you have considered it before, but just haven't pulled the trigger on getting it. Do you enjoy photography equipment as much as me? Do you get butterflies in your stomach on the days that you know your equipment is going to be delivered? Okay, maybe that's just me, but let's not shame me for my shopping addiction. But let's take a look at 3 pieces of photography gear that can add a lot of value to your wildlife photography kit. Not just fun pieces of equipment, but equipment that can make a difference out in the field. Number 1, a field monitor. Now, this was a recent purchase that I made, and I do plan on dedicating an entire video to the use of a field monitor. But the main purpose that I got it, and there's a couple of reasons really. First of all, having a field monitor for what I'm doing, I purchased one that allows me to record my electronic viewfinder, right? My EVF. Because what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to make tutorials here on the channel while recording my EVF, which means you guys are going to be able to see everything that I see through my camera, right? This can be really helpful when we're talking about things like settings or composition or what have you, right? So I think this is going to be a lot of fun for some future videos, and that was the reason I got it. But for many of you, you don't need to invest in a field monitor that has the recording aspect. If you're interested in that, I'll just touch real briefly. There's a lot of different models out there. One of the most popular is the Atomos Ninja 5. And this was the one that I had wanted for a very long time. But when I was doing my research for getting one, I found some very inexpensive options that came with really great reviews. So I decided to give that one a try. I couldn't be happier with the decision I made. If you're looking for a recording monitor, the Ninja Atomos 5 is a great product. There's no doubt about it. But the monitor itself is probably going to run you somewhere probably around $400 or $500. Then you have to buy an external hard drive that plugs into it. You have to get some cords. It doesn't come with all of these little extra things that you need. So by the time you get done adding this all up, you're going to spend somewhere between $800 to $1,000 to get this monitor. I got a monitor called Shimbal. It's made by Shimbal. And this monitor is like $250, $270, somewhere around there. And it records. But the great thing is you don't have to buy an external hard drive. You can actually use a memory card. Now, of course, right, if you get the Ninja Atomos 5, you get some higher recording values, right, like 4K, those types of things. The Shimbal does, just high definition, right? The 1920 by 1080, which quite honestly, for YouTube videos and stuff like that, it's more than adequate. We don't really need to have 4K for every single thing we do. But that's just kind of a little breakdown if you're looking at that. If you just want a field monitor that doesn't have the recording features, then you can get them for even cheaper. So you can probably get a real decent field monitor for between $150 to $200. And again, it won't record, but it does give you a larger screen when you're doing wildlife. And that is the fun part of it, right? It just attaches to your camera's hot shoe, right? And then you'll have a cord, probably the HDMI cord that'll go from your monitor into the side of your camera. And then you'll be able to see the image on this monitor. Now, what I would recommend as far as monitor size, they make them in like a 5.5 inch, and they also make them in a 7-inch. I think the 7-inch is getting a little large, right? That becomes a little bit cumbersome. The 5.5-inch screen works beautifully, because you also need to remember that you have to have the Sony NPF type battery to go onto the back of it to power it. So when you put that on, that's going to add a little extra weight. So if you couple that with that bigger screen, you might find it's just a little too much to handle when you're hand holding your setup. But what is really cool about the field monitor is you can look at that back screen without having to put your face up to the camera, and you can just see things larger, and it might give you a little bit more perspective. But what I really like is I don't really like, when I'm trying to get those real low shots, having to lie on my stomach, right? I've shared with you before that I had a hernia surgery several months ago, and it's just still not comfortable for me to get into those positions. So if you're someone that maybe has some sort of, restrictions due to injury or anything else, and it's not comfortable to lay down on your stomach and try to, break your neck to look through your camera's viewfinder, this is a great way to get around that, because now you can just lower yourself down to the ground and push that screen back a little bit so that you're kind of looking straight down on it, and you can look at your subject really low, but your camera is literally going to be sitting on the ground, and you just have to support it with your hand underneath. This is a great way to get those super low angles and really add a lot of visual interest into your photographs. Now, I will say it's not all perfect, right? Like anything in life, a field monitor isn't 100% perfect. So let's talk about a couple of the cons with it. One, the batteries can drain pretty quickly on them. So you do want to get the Sony NPF style batteries. You don't have to necessarily get the Sony batteries themselves, but you want to get something that comes with a good review. There's a lot of cheap options out there. I've purchased them and they last a long time, but I would recommend getting the cheaper ones. You can usually buy 2, and it comes with a charger for 2 batteries as well. Pick up a couple of those. I think it's worth having like 5 or 6 batteries on you for a field monitor. That seems to work really well. But the thing is that you're going to have that little added expense for the batteries. Okay. So, but again, it's not huge. It'll probably cost you around $100 to get somewhere between 4 and 6 batteries. The other con, though, that comes with these field monitors, and this is why you want so many extra batteries, is it's good to have the monitor on pretty much at all times while you're shooting, because they do take a while to boot up. So depending on the monitor you get, it can take anywhere, I would say on average, anywhere between 10 and 20 seconds to turn on. So it's not the time that I mind, right? I don't mind waiting the 10 to 20 seconds, but if you've got something going on in front of you from a wildlife perspective, obviously 10 or 20 seconds, that's valuable time. That can be the difference between getting the shot and completely missing it. So you want to have it on so that you're always ready and prepared. The final con that comes with these field monitors, and this is going to depend really on your camera make and model, as well as the field monitor that you get. But one of the things that's common when using them is that you're only going to be able to see your image and see what's going on in front of you on the actual screen of the field monitor. So for instance, when I have this attached to my Sony A1, I am not able to use the back screen on my camera or the viewfinder. They go black. So this can be a little bit tricky, right? If you're trying to photograph a flying or moving animal, it's gonna take a little bit of time to really get the understanding of how to move the camera using this field monitor to track your subject. I'm not going to lie. That is a little bit difficult in the beginning. And that is something that I am still working on. I have success. I don't have success. It's one of those things. But quite honestly, that can happen even looking through the viewfinder, right? We don't always get perfect tracking even when doing that. That's one of the challenges of wildlife photography and using these longer lenses is sometimes it can be really difficult to find the bird in the frame. Well, I think it gets notched up just a little bit when you're using those field monitors, makes it just a little bit more tricky, but it can certainly be done. It just needs a little bit of practice. Number 2, a good set of binoculars. Now, I had a cheap pair for quite a while, and really because I had a cheap pair and I wasn't thrilled with them, it kind of really prevented me from taking them out into the field and using them because I just thought, they're not that great. And so why do I want to carry something else, right? So this is kind of sometimes what we deal with photography equipment, right? Sometimes we buy once and we buy cheap and we're kind of not thrilled with the performance, so it deters us. Other times we load up on photography gear for one reason or another. And then sometimes we don't use the gear when we go that way too, because it's like, I don't want to have to pack up all this stuff. It becomes a burden to use it out in the field. And so that can sometimes be a deterrent as well. But I think having a good set of binoculars, and I shared with you in a video quite a while ago, how I bought a pair of $100 binoculars, and there is a link to them in the show notes. But you know what? For $100, I think that's a really reasonable price, especially for a good set of binoculars. But I absolutely love these binoculars. They're very clear, right? And I believe they're a 10 by 42, if memory serves me correct. I'm pretty sure that's what the specs are on them. But they are fantastic. And I would recommend checking them out. And I know many of you might be thinking, yeah, well, I just use my camera, when I'm out there and I got my lens, I'll just zoom around. But that drains batteries, right? You're focusing on different areas further away or closer to kind of scope out or scout out what's going around with wildlife, maybe trying to identify something or find something. And that constant working of the camera, again, is draining those batteries. Not to mention the process of scanning and scouting with your camera is much slower than when you're using a set of binoculars. So I just have a set of binoculars on a string, put it over the neck, right? It's always hanging down here at the side, and it's just always ready to pick up and scan. And I just find it so much easier and faster to do it with binoculars. And it's just such a great way to observe wildlife, either from a distance or maybe even a little bit closer and when you're trying to identify or do whatever you're trying to do. So definitely invest in a pair of binoculars for out in the field. It really just, I think, changes your whole experience when photographing wildlife. Number 3, a nice video or fluid head. Now, if you are going out into the field and you don't do any kind of video work with wildlife, you are strictly a stills photographer, then stick with the gimbal head, right? The gimbal head is going to be best for those of you who are just doing photography. It just is more fluid. I think it's more flexible when it comes to taking photos. But if you're going to be doing a mix of photos and video, which is something that I do, I just find it easier to have one head, right? The video head will work for photography. I do prefer the gimbal head, but I can make it work, right? I can make it work. It's just a little bit extra effort. But I like being able to have one head where I can go from taking photos to taking video with just a flip of a switch, right? It makes it very easy. Now, I used to have, and I was thinking about dedicating a video to this at some point in the future. Maybe it'll be posted before this. Maybe I'll post it later. Haven't decided yet, but I used to use the Manfrotto 502. I think it might be the AH. I can't remember the exact model. I know it's a 502, but at any rate, I was photographing at Boone Hall Plantation, and I walked back to my car. I was leaving for the day, and I set my tripod down, and my tripod wasn't fully open. And as I was putting my camera into the car, I heard my tripod fall over. Well, I really didn't think too much of it, but when I went out for my next session, which was actually at Boone Hall again, I went to put my camera on the head of the tripod, and it wasn't, there's usually a click when that plate slides in, right? It's that locking plate so that when your camera is actually on the video head, it can't slide out, right? Because there's that safety pin. Well, I was looking at it, and apparently, I don't know, talk about Murphy's Law, right? But when that tripod had fallen over in the parking lot during my last session, it fell right on the button that releases that lock to get your camera off the tripod. So now that button was jammed in and the lock wasn't working properly. So it was very easy. The camera would just slide off the back of the head. So I didn't want to take any chances of ever letting that tripod go, right? If I forgot to lock it down or something and that head fell backwards for any reason, the camera would just come tumbling right off of that head. So I got a new video head, and I invested in the small rig. It's a little bit cheaper than the Manfrotto. The Manfrotto is much bigger and much heavier. Has a few more features that I do like a little better than the small rig, but I kind of traded off features for size and weight, right? I don't need the best features in the world on my video head. I'm not a professional videographer. I just need something that's going to get the job done. So I went with the small rig, which was about $160 compared to the Manfrotto, which is somewhere between like $200 and $220 right now. So I went with a little bit lighter, and it still has the panning and tilt features and all those great things that you get, right? But there's just some things that don't work as nicely or as easily as the Manfrotto does, but it was definitely a nice buy. I'm glad I got it. I appreciate the size and weight reduction, and it's working really well for me so far. But that is another piece that I would highly recommend that you have if you're doing photography as well as videography. It's kind of that all-in-one solution that just speeds up your workflow so you can switch from video to photo as you want to. All right, so those are 3 pieces of equipment that I think need to kind of be a staple in everyone's kit. Let me know, are you using any or all of these different pieces of equipment? And let me know how they are working out for you. If you're interested in purchasing one of these, let me know which one you're thinking about purchasing and why. I would love to hear that. Hey, if you are tired of monthly subscription fees when it comes to your editing program, and you're tired of AI edits and algorithms controlling your editing process, might be time to look into DxO Photolab 8, where not only do you own your program, but you own your editing process with tons of precision tools to help you control and manage every single detail. If you're interested in checking out DxO, you want to download a 30-day free trial, head on over to dxo.com and you can download any of their software. Try it out for 30 days, give it a go, see what you think about it, see what it does for your photos. If you think it's something that you're interested in and you want to purchase it, come on back to the show notes, use my link, and also don't forget to use my special discount code at the time of checkout. That code is Magnolia, and it'll be able to save you 15% off any of your purchases. And if you're new to DxO or you have been using it for a while, but you're just looking to elevate your knowledge with the program and elevate your editing skills, then head on over to magnoliaphotographysc.com/store, where you can check out my course. It's my DxO Photolab 8 Masterclass. I'm going to help you with every step of the editing process, from learning how to customize your workspace to get a systematic step-by-step process in place to create professional looking photo edits with consistency. All right. Thank you so much for stopping by and joining me today, guys. I hope you appreciated this. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. But until then, you might want to check this video out as well.